Hello and welcome to another YuGiOh video, and today we are taking a look at a pure Orcust build. So finally I've got my hands on a playset of YuGiOh as you've seen from the intro, and super excited to actually have this, but unfortunately still no real life events for a little while to work with. But after the success of the Mech Knight Orcust list, people were interested in how my sort of more traditional Orcust setup would look like, so I thought I'd take you through this list. There is still, a lot of things that you can play around with, and I'll explain some of my choices throughout to you. So when I initially put this list together, I was intending to play Allures, and you'll see they're actually not included in this build, and I made a few changes recently, so I'll point those out as we get there. So we start off with 3 copies of YuGiOh, the Orcust Mech Knight. Of course, we have to play this card. It is the ultimate starter for this deck, which can surprisingly play through an Ash Blossom and still give you something reasonable to muck around with. So yeah, it's one of the best cards that we have from this deck, and it's so nice to finally be able to play it in the TCG. Then 3 Orcust Nightmare. So generally, I don't really like playing this card at 3 unless you play triple Orchestrated Return. I would normally say just play 2 of this card. However, in order to remove the Allures, which I'll explain why I did that a little bit later, I wanted to be able to maximize the power of the Orchestrated Return and make the deck slightly more consistent in that sense. And it also means that you can do some more interesting things when, like, you open your Jet Synchron, for example. It becomes significantly more powerful if you open it alongside a Nightmare. So playing 3 of this for the moment, and as well as that we played 2 Orcust Symbol Skeleton. So again, this is a card I'm a very high advocate of playing just 1 Symbol Skeleton, because unless you have an extender to go alongside it, it is something of a brick. Because it's not a starter card, it's just part of your combo pieces. Sure, losing 1 off a Gizmek is bad, but you should never be losing 1 off a Gizmek anyway, because you shouldn't be activating your Gizmek unless you already had 1 taken out the deck. So you could just play a single copy and never have to worry about that situation. But for this build, tripling up on return, I think you do have to play a higher Orcust count, so double Symbol Skeleton here, and no Bombard in this build. This deck is not playing the Jet Synchron single card combo, so it doesn't have to go into like Formula Synchron and Halkify Rex. As a result, there's no Bombard in this list because you really don't need it as a result. 1 World Wand, very debatable that you can play 2. However, I wanted something, so this was basically the toss-up. I decided to play the second Symbol Skeleton instead of the second wand, because although technically Skeleton is not as important for the combos as Wand, it is more of an approximation of a starter in that you can normal summon it and have an extender alongside it, and then 1 Gizmek to round off the Dark Machine sort of lineup here. And then for the rest of the Orcust lineup, we have triple return, 1 Babel, and 1 Crescendo. So I was initially testing with 2 return. I decided to maximize this out, as I said, to replace the Allures. And when you can see the full list, I'll explain why I got rid of the Allures. But this just means that if you open this with any combination of these 6 cards, you end in a very strong position regardless. Opening it alongside YuGiOh is actually fine, because it means when your YuGiOh is not your starter card, because perhaps you open your Scrap Recyclers, then this becomes a pseudo extender in that sense. So really happy with return, and definitely happy to maximize out on that card. So that's the Orcust lineup. Then I did just mention we have the Scrap lineup in this deck, so triple Recycler, 1 Golem, and 1 Jet. And then because you're playing the Scrap combos, you play the World Legacy Succession with the Lib. So I wasn't playing the Scrap engine for a very long time. I was testing the Jet Synchron engine with triple tuning, triple jets, and 1 Quick Draw Synchron, which is a really nice engine, definitely worth trying out. But I put up a poll on the Orchestra Duelist page, and Scrap engine won that one by miles when you're not playing Machina. So I decided that I would put the scrap engine in here. It does change how the list functions a bit more, because this becomes a brick, this becomes, it's no longer a starter card. You have to play this on top. So essentially you're playing at least 2 more bricks and fewer starter cards, but then Scrap Recycler itself puts out so much power. Like, if you compare the boards that you make off the tuning build, where you just play a Jet Synchron combo, and you compare that with the boards you end on with a Scrap Recycler, there's just like no comparison there. The scrap boards are significantly better in terms of the amount of disruption you have. It is slightly worse going second as a result, but I think it's just a slightly better engine at the moment, so hence playing these 6 cards here. Okay, so moving on, the deck at this stage kind of struggles to play extenders, or extenders which are also starter cards. So I put in the Dark Warrior engine, so 1 Armageddon Knight, 1 Dark Grepher, and 1 Rotor. Grepher is actually the most important card out of these, or essentially Rotor is the same as Grepher, so these 2 are the most important, because this card enables you to play as an extender and as a starter card, whereas Armageddon Knight is just a great starter. The fact that you can combo off with your Armageddon Knight plus an extender using the ability of Lib to set Succession and then revive it and use its effect again makes it almost as good as Scrap Recycler, so very happy with how this works as a starter card, but obviously it's not an extender, so it doesn't quite fulfill the role that Dark Grepher and Rotor do. If there is another dark monster that you can act as an extender and a starter, definitely let me know, because I'll be interested to see how that would function in here, potentially replacing these 3 cards. Otherwise you can just play extenders here. So I was toying around with the Danger Engine for a while, or maybe triple Apprentice Illusion Magician, both great options, but they minimize your resources so much by comparison, whereas this, you know, being a starter and an extender, and the fact that you can play 2 of it, and the fact that this gives you so many resources, just, it seemed like that was the better option at the time. And then we have the 3 generic extenders, being Foolish Fairy or Monster Reborn and Reasoning. So definitely, if you haven't tested it out, give Reasoning a go. Sure, it's not as reliable as the rest of the deck, but it's always going to at least send something which is really important, and it means you can play a higher Orcust count. Foolish is obviously necessary. Monster Reborn is actually phenomenal. The number of people who don't respect the fact that you can Monster Reborn their graveyard because this is a one-off makes this card easily worth it. It does mean, you know, you see here we don't have an enormous count of spell extenders in this deck, which is something I would like to change up, but unfortunately at the moment, because of the meta that we're competing with, you have to play a ludicrous number of hand traps. So let's get into those. So triple Nibiru, which you obviously have to play, triple Infinite Imperm, triple DD Crow, and 2 Phantasme in this build. So let me talk through the top line first. So Nibiru, I would love to replace this with Token Collector if it were possible, but unfortunately you can't play Token Collector in an Orcust deck, because during your opponent's turn you're always going to be summoning Orcust cards with Babel in play, whereas Nibiru will still wipe the field even if it doesn't actually make it onto the field, so Nibiru is significantly better in that respect, and it's great the interaction that you have with all the Orcust cards here. Imperm is the second best hand trap, probably after the Token Collector at the moment, because you can just imperm a lot of decks in the right position and generate massive advantage. Plus, even against the Eldritch matchup, the fact that you can set this and stop their spell traps and their monsters simultaneously is really crucial. And also there are actually a lot of decks where you can lose to single floodgates, which this allows you to break through as well. So I think you kind of have to play Imperm at this point. I was considering switching this out for Skullmeister in the Allure build, which goes along the line of theory, which I may as well explain now. So the reason why I took out Allure was that you want Allure in your deck to balance your hand. So if you start off with too many hand traps, then you want Allure to take your hand traps out of your hand and to give you more starter cards or more extenders. In this deck, with only 5 hand traps, and this isn't really a hand trap that you could allure away, that just wasn't possible. So you'd have to play more dark monsters that were hand traps, or replace this with Skullmeister or something like that. Then if you look at the starter lineup that we've seen so far, it is majority Dark monsters, with Armageddon Knight and Dark Grepher being starters, and the triple Gizmek being starters, but that's only 6 starter cards that you can potentially get rid of with Allure, whereas Allure could also be could also be in the same hand as Scrap Recycler, and then it won't be able to replace a starter card if you have too many of them with a hand trap then, because you can't banish your Scrap Recycler off Allure. So you want the Allure to be able to modulate your hand such that you have whatever you're missing. So if you're missing extenders, you have to be able to get rid of the other cards in order to get extenders. So in this deck, there aren't enough hand traps that you can banish in order to get to those extenders, and there aren't enough starter cards that you want to banish in order to get to those extenders. So that's why the Allures came out and got replaced with a slightly bigger Orcust engine. Even then, in the Allure build, I was playing the 2 Nightmare, the 1 Skeleton. So you don't want to banish, it's fine to banish the Gizmek, you don't want to banish the Wand, you didn't want to banish the Skeleton, it was okay to banish 1 Nightmare, but you never wanted to banish the Gyusoh either. So like, just Allure, because you have to play so many hand traps and not enough extenders, Allure just wouldn't be able to fix your hand in the capacity that you want it to. So if you do want to play an Allure build, definitely play more dark hand traps so that you have the ability to modulate that slightly better, and definitely play a different starter engine instead of the Scrap engine. If you're playing the Scrap engine, you can't really fit Allure in with the number of other cards you have to play, unfortunately. So that's the long-winded reasoning behind Allure there. So why am I only playing 2 Phantasmate in this build? Well, I know you guys really love wombo combos that end on boards that are near unbreakable. Unfortunately, Orcust in itself doesn't really do that unless you tech in other engines like the Winder engine or the Dragon Buster engine. And given that I didn't want to sacrifice 2 slots in the extra deck, I'm bringing you guys the Dragon Buster version. So the 1 card that got removed for that was the Fantastical Dragon Phantasme. Otherwise, honestly, I think you should play this in the side deck. Unless you're playing singles matches like the Remote Duel Invitational, which is a little bit funky. But you need a board that doesn't lose entirely to Dark Rule No More. Generally, Orcust is pretty good at that, but this just gives you something slightly better to end on, because your board is nowhere near unbreakable in Orcust at this point in time. So that's why this is in the deck. And the final card, obviously you know by now, if I'm going to be playing any deck, it's going to have an Upstart Goblin in it, so that's the 40th card in this deck, taking the deck count down to 39. Moving on to the extra deck. So some of this can vary, and I'll explain the choices in just a bit. So Orcust engine, double Gyusoh, obviously one of the best cards in the deck, triple Galatea, 1 long Gyusoh. For the longest time I played only 2 Galatea, and I think you can honestly get away with it if you want to fit in more options in your extra deck. And long Gyusoh comes up surprisingly little at the moment, at least with how this particular build functions, so potentially this is a card that you could remove. So if I was going to remove anything, in order to support the Winder version of the extra deck, these 2 cards would go, and you'd get a Winder and a Predaplant Vete Anaconda. But that's the Orcust lineup. And then cards that sort of continue your play. So Scrap Wyvern is phenomenal, because if you open your Scrap Recycler and it doesn't get hand trapped, this card gives you an insane board. If you open your Scrap Recycler and it does get hand trapped, then the fact that you play Scrap Wyvern means that you can still put a really impressive board on. If I wasn't pushing for such a stupendous turn 1 board, I would actually cut the fridge, I never remember its name, the Scrap Golem, is that it? From the main deck, and I would still play the Scrap Wyvern, because it still means that if you open Scrap Recycler and an extender, you can summon this, and then bring back your scrap, go into another scrap from deck, and then carry on your plays like that. The other card which obviously carries on your combos is the Lib, the World Key Blade Master. Yep, sorry guys, I still don't have a physical copy of this, so we're running with a proxy version for now. But this goes hand in hand with the Wyvern for a lot of your key plays. Even if your Scrap Recycler does get hand trapped, you can still do crazy stuff with the Lib. So very, very happy with that in the deck too. And then some of your combos require you to have the Linkaribo, so this is just if you open your Gyatso with nothing else to really go alongside it. And although most of the combos don't require this, it does give you the Buster Lock, so the Union Carrot is in here as well. I think a lot of people miss out on the fact that you can constantly just like keep equipping good stuff to your board, even if you're not going to end with like a super heavily protected Buster Lock. You could just put like a Nightmare or a Skeleton onto your board, so that then during your opponent's turn when you do some fun Link plays, you have even more resources to work out with. So that one's really nice there. The deck does require some finishers because without the extra deck options, sometimes you just can't deal enough damage to win the game. So Boros Dragon is in here. I'm sure some of you will think this is like playing with the training wheels on, as per se, which is fair enough. You know, sometimes you do just want to rapidly take a win out from your opponent, especially in a format where Adamancipator exists and Block Dragon is still at 3. Your grind game can surely never be as good as that, and surely never be as good as the Eldritch deck, which is constantly regenerating resources. So what you kind of have to do is rely on the fact that you have so many hand traps and so much disrupts that you can stop your opponent from killing you in turn 1 and then try to kill them in the second turn, because the deck has so much removal as well. So Boros is necessary for that. And then obviously the deck relies upon the IP combos for most of the disruptions that you establish. So IP, Unicorn, Zeraboros, and Appaloosa are the options of choice here. You can potentially switch this up for like a Topologic Bomber or something, but I've just kept in the Zeraboros because I think it's the most generic. Appaloosa because when you're playing the Lib Scrap Wyvern version of the deck, you can summon this out relatively easily and then boost it up with your Nightmare. And then the Unicorn is obviously just great for spinning back resources. It's actually amazing when you do like a board that has Lib IP and then you go into Unicorn and get rid of 2 resources. It's just so phenomenally powerful to shuffle stuff into the deck. So that is it for the extra deck, and that is it for the deck profile. We're not going to do a side deck because there's no I mean, there's no like local meta that you would want to compare it to. But let me know what your thoughts are on this pure build of Orcust. Sure, it has the scrap in it, but I mean, it's still essentially pure Orcust in the fact that this deck is not trying to do anything fancy with Machina cards or anything like that. If you're interested in seeing a Machina version of the deck, very, very happy to put together my list and share it with you guys and share some combos as well. And if you're interested in seeing any of the like all-powerful Mech Knight Orcust or normal Orcust combos, then I have a full video. It's like almost an hour of combos giving you the full detail of how you can turn like Gyatso on its own, or Scrap Recycler on its own, or Jet Synchro on its own into some really impressive boards. Some of those do use cards which aren't in this deck, but there are lots of variations that you can work with to get around that as well. So that has been it for this pure Orcust build. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you all in the next video. Turn it up. Let's go.